1. This one is about removing the fear of putting mark on paper. We're going to investigate the different methods of organic mark making and see just what you can accomplish with watercolor, your brush, and your Moleskine paper. Now, I also wanted to avoid any confusion and make sure that you know that your Moleskine journal here is not the artist book that we're going to be making through this course. So this here is going to be your guide, your journal, so you really shouldn't be afraid to really get in there, get messy, be loose, be relaxed, because we will be making separate artist books of our own complete making later down the line. Now, in addition to just giving you this Moleskine, I think I should tell you as to why I have chosen the Moleskine journal. And honestly, it's just to do with the fact that I have been using the Moleskine journals for about 12 years now, and I originally started with this one back in 2008 when I was traveling around Europe, and by now I have filled a great many of them. This is but the tip of the iceberg, so I really cannot wait to share my love for the Moleskine journal and artist bookmaking with you and get you feeling wonderfully creative, inspired, and just filled to your fingertips with inspiration. So I will narrate you through a couple of different warm-up exercises that will help get your brain and your wrist jiving along and making some marks without fear. So in a typical in-person workshop, we usually just kick off by making a few gestural lines with a couple of choice colors. But I do invite you, if you really want to get to know each color individually. But you can just join me in wetting your brush, picking, say, your first color, probably maybe a lighter one like a yellow or similar, just maybe not blue or black. And I just want you to get onto your wet brush, load as much color as you possibly can, and just press down, lift up. Repeat, press down, lift up, press down, lift up, and just feel that pressure, see the shape, confirm what you're doing with your wrist, and just see how long that color will last. And you can really see, you know, the transience and the transition between the different color stages, despite the fact that it's all of the same pigment. Now in the next one, I'll pick a different color, load it right up as much as I can get on the brush, and just press it straight down, lift up, straight down, lift up, straight down, lift up. Just a few more times, and just seeing once again how it looks when it's fully doused in the color and then how it wears out. It's a really good way of getting your wrists and hands into the swing of just holding a brush and learning how to apply and release the pressure. So color number 3, pressing down, lifting up, down, up, down, up, down. Lovely. So we're just going to fill our page with marks like these and just really kind of focus on that feeling of maybe wanting to do the same little stroke, pressing down, lifting up, pressing down, lifting up. This blue here is one of my absolute favorites in this beautiful gouache set. So I think it's going to be a real treat for you as well. And then just slowly working into some darker colors, getting some green. So down, up, pressing down, lighten, and just continuing along. And it's just a really lovely way of getting your hands and your wrist into the swing of things, getting to know your colors, and really seeing that transition from what a full wet color brush does to an increasingly drying or used up effect. I think you'll find that that really supports your learning super well. So down, up, down, up. Lovely. So that's our first page done. In a lot of my journals, you'll see, and I'll just chat to you while our pages dry. So feel free to either start or just continue on making these marks on your page as I wait for my paint here to dry. And I just want to have a quick mention of how I tend to use these journals and why we're going to work more on the right hand side to begin with. And you can go back later to do work on the left hand side, or you can already decide in yourself to do some light work on the left hand side. So usually I'll do my heavy duty wet painting drawing on the right hand page, which I will always call my main actress. And then the left hand side is always the supporting actress. So I'm gonna flip through some journals and really show you what I mean by this idea. And it's not, a rule that I follow 100% of the time. It's just my way of being kind to the journal, because this paper is not designed for watercolor or not for dense watercolor use, which is why I tend to simplify it by only filling it on one side with color and then on the other side doing something lighter or using it more, say, to cleanse my brush, or do some automatic writing, or to just do whatever feels like it would complete the right hand side. So we'll talk a little bit more about this as we move along, but I also will of course encourage you to, as this book is your own, take it on a journey. And if you say are left-handed, I encourage you to work either from the back of the journal to the front using just the left-hand side, or completely make it your own. So right now I'm just telling you my recommendation and how I might do things, and how you do things might be different, and I totally encourage that as well. So even though my page now is quite wet, I'll once again explain in another way why I tend to just work on the right-hand side. So while my page is still drying, I'm just gonna flip it over, and I'm not gonna let it touch the other side. I'm just gonna hold it here, maybe secure the journal like so, and see if we can't just continue on this fresh page whilst we can still hold the other one on the left hand side to let it dry. So if you feel like it, of course I welcome you to try out every single color on all of the 4 dies that you received, just to see exactly what colors are in the set. Or if you're happy enough with what we did on the previous page, and potentially bring a little bit of watercolor or illustration experience with you into the workshop, you don't have to do any more pages. So this is very self-navigated. I invite you to do what feels right for you, or even if you're vibing to doing that just now, you can even just do a few little mixed sort of pieces. How I've got one bunch of colors, I've actually got the 2 colors on my brush by accident, but how I'm once again just kind of wearing out the pigment to see how much can be accomplished with one blended color. So I can do the same again, say by picking up a light color like orange on my brush, and then I'm going to dip into a red because it's darker and it won't be damaged by it. And I'm just going to go straight on here and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you can see how it kind of lightens over time. And then we'll just do one more. I want to soak up my accidental yellowy green in here. So I'm just going to do kind of another take. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Great. And then we're going to go into what I refer to as the little petri dish experiments, where we're going to really learn to like drip drop different colors and see how we can get everyone playing together. But even for now, I think it's really good for us just to have these 2 pages as a reference point. And once again, if you want to do more, I fully encourage you to do more. It's just these 2 pages you'll need at the minimum to just really make friendly with the watercolor on this particular paper, which will be what we work on the most. However, as advised, I do suggest that you either secure the watercolor paper as discussed, or just continue on a few other different papers you might have around the house to experiment with. Primarily because, just gonna hoover a few of these back up to let me turn the page. primarily because we will be working in the Moleskine for the most of this journey. But these first 2 pages are really great at explaining to you just how much watercolor this paper is willing to accept, how much water is too much. We're going to talk about blending different colors as well as using our paintbrush as a little vacuum cleaner, and maybe figuring out some of the basics in terms of how to blend the colors in a nice harmonious way. So I'm just using a couple of different light colors, so not my purples, not my blues, not the black, just to have a little play with this and observe how the different colors dry out as we work, and when it's timely to maybe do a little drop in of a shade of a color that's a little bit starker. So we can even play an experiment where this is really fresh. So what happens if I just do a little Petri dish drop? This is less fresh, what happens there? And this should almost be dry. So you can see how this is bleeding quite a lot. This is different, and that's really staying quite stationary because that's already a different type of dry. So what I might then show you now is with a dry brush, which I can often do just by squeezing the moisture out with my fingers, you can actually go back over that and soften it right back if you want to, or even pretty much make it just be a really gentle little stain, which can be quite sweet. Similarly, drying that out again, I can rub this back if I want, or kind of give it a bit of a different energy, or even just leave it like this. And I wonder what happens if I drop another one in. I can have a little play, and I encourage you to really paint up a whole page of different color circles and just kind of go around, go nuts, just have a play. Sometimes go in and hoover some paint back up, other times just let it bleed and just have a really lovely meditative time about it. And I'll show you what happens if you put in another color like that. You can get some really nice effects. And using the right paper is quite important because this paper is able to really handle the amount of water I'm putting onto it, which our Moleskine journal is not ideal for. Not to this extent of wetting, but it will be perfect for a bunch of the other things that we're going to do. So this is all going to work out lovely. So just there I showed you how you can kind of set the scene by wetting it with one color and then injecting a spot of color, knowing that it's only going to bleed within the area where it's been most recently moistened. I'll show you in a different example how we're back up here with that dry sphere. And then I put in, say, just a little brown or whatever this color ends up being, a bit of a mishmash. Just end up putting in a bit of a wet spot, shall we call it, like that. I dry out my brush. I will grab a color, actually maybe a bit of blue, and just see how dropping that in, we can just focus it on the stain as per your design, which means you really do have control over where you want it to go. And one more of my favorite things is loading up your brush, wet brush, with a heap of bold color. And you can even do this, flick, and then you can just see how all of these beautiful colors intersect with each other. And do another one. I'm going to leave that to be quite moist, but it's a little too moist. So I'm just going to dry my brush and hoover back a little bit of that color. And then we're going to splash maybe a darker blue over the top to see what happens. I want to do less of a big diagonal splash, so I'm going to go straight up and down, boom, straight down. And you can really see how the spot that lands in the wet bit really bleeds, whereas the rest of it stays a little bit clearer as well. And then what shall we do on the last one? I'm just going to pull this back. If you know that even after a minute you still have a little puddle sitting there, you should be prepared for that to really warp the paper. So it can be really good if you just want to highlight one bit, maybe boom, just drop that in, boom, like that. Or even back in here, but you can see how already that patch is so dry that it's not really bleeding. So you can always add a bit of water like this, really get it going a bit bigger, dry your brush, suction some of it back, and then drop a new color in, maybe a green, just boom, 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 maybe something a bit stronger, really load up the brush. And then once that's nice and wet, I might grab a purple, which will be lovely, and then really go over the top and see what effects we can get. That one's looking really lush. And then just having a little play to see what happens if I do this or if I do that. And I invite you to just have a real good play at home as well. See what effects you can get. See how wet something has to be to get this kind of spotting, the moisture level on here to have this outcome, and just the same thing everywhere. Because it really is just up to you to become comfortable with the materials and really experiment and have a great time with everything. The secret to fearlessness really is just doing it. So just honoring the moment and just going straight for it. And sometimes I'll just go back, suck up some little bits, because I really want to highlight the spots in there and not warp my paper much more. I might just go in the middle. And it's really nice to highlight some tonal differences by just vacuuming, say, just the inside line like I'm doing here, to even just highlight the difference between the dark edge and then the light inside. And I might just grab one more spot. This one's feeling a little underdone for me still, and that's always up to you to decide. Felt like maybe a little spot of orange and maybe a big wax. So if you really load up your brush, really strong, and just go boom, just do one more, and get some really exciting outcomes. Okay, so we're just going to repeat this exercise, but I'm going to do one super large circle just so you can really see the delicious details you can get in this little watercolor petri dish experiment. So I'm just going to kick off with some light yellows, browns, pinks to try and cover this large surface area. Now I don't recommend that you work this big. I think it's best, I'll show you a little bit later on how to do a smaller study. This here is just for you to look at, enjoy, get some ideas, see how I create the layers, and just get some great ideas before you embark on a couple of pages on watercolor paper of the little petri dish exercise. So I might just, I'll be doing this as quickly as possible, just as kind of a little speedy build-up exercise. Repeating some of the watercolor wisdoms I'll be pushing out to make sure that you remember that on your own little journey, which also covers the idea of not going too dark right on the first layer so that you have something to build upon. That's probably number one for the petri dish exercise. So this corner up here is about as dark as you should get at any point in this one. Just gonna bring in some more colors down here. So you can see that the watercolor at this stage does a lot of the work for you. Like over here, we've already got some really gorgeous transitions. And I'll just take you back to your lesson about hoovering up the watercolor just by squeezing the water out of your brush, because here I can already see it pooling. So if you see it pooling anywhere, that means a little bit of trouble coming your way. So the sooner you can attend to it, just by hoovering that up, the better you're doing yourself in the long run. So I do kind of like to stick with, I guess, the colors that are emerging in each particular section. So I'm not going to go too crazy too early on. I tend to save the crazy for last, you'll see. So at this point, I'm just kind of experimenting, and I am, because I don't tend to do this kind of thing in my daily art practice. So this is even fun for someone like me. So I really encourage you to get really nice and loose with it. Have no expectation. I mean, you could never predict the outcome, so why bother? And just have a really fun time with it. Just gonna add a bit more excitement. See what happens with that. Maybe a little patch of green over here. Now I'm trying to work quickly as we're losing light, as well as just using quite a lot of water. So I'm trying to show you just how much you can even accomplish in, say, 3 or 4 minutes. And this is an A3 size piece of paper, so this is about as big as one can really do this exercise and keep control of it in about a 5-minute space of time. There's just so much to enjoy about it. Really good way to maybe get into the practice of it. So you might find as you work your way through the course that a particular warm-up exercise might serve you really nicely along the whole journey. So kind of figuring out what helps get you in the zone, get you in the mood to having a play with watercolor. And it might be that this exercise is a really good way to quieten your mind after a busy work day, or just to relax into the process. Or you might find that you don't have much time, so you want to get straight into whatever module you're working on. That's fine too. Gonna hoover up here a little bit. Just observe yourself and see what really feels good about the process. So I'm particularly loving what's happening up here. That looks really lush, and I think I'm gonna add a bit more in here. So my favorite way of splotching is just having this finger out, loading up my brush, and then just going boom. My biggest, I suppose, recommendation of what not to do is to bring the brush back or kind of flick the opposite way, because in workshops in the past I have seen a few people flick themselves in the face, which is harmless and definitely a good way of getting laughs in a workshop, but definitely don't ruin, you know, a nice shirt that you're wearing. So always flicking down away from yourself. Yeah. Gonna build up a little bit more in this corner. And this exercise is also really good, whatever stock you end up working on. And like I said, watercolor paper is pretty essential for this exercise, because most papers absolutely cannot absorb this amount of water that I'm putting into the page. But later on, as we move through different watercolor papers, or not even watercolor papers, but like say a canvas paper or transparency paper, just keep in mind everything you've learned. You'll see it all will come in handy. And the more you can practice just draining the brush, sucking some paint back, even if there's no necessity for it, just for you to practice, that will really pay dividends when we come to do more work later on. So I'm just highlighting some of these really lush bits that are coming out, and sometimes just doing dot, 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 dot is enough to create kind of that little wave that will come through. And I will always work, you'll see this as we move through the course, I always work with a brush that's kind of bigger than what I need, because if you just go up on your tippy toes of your brush, you can really get really nice thin marks. But at the flip of a switch, you can also do a big sweeping motion, which can be priceless when you, for example, have to really quickly hoover up some stuff, or you just want to do one big gestural mark to take a composition to completion. So I won't push too much more paint around here. I think I've given you a good impression of some real basic skills in terms of the vacuuming, draining the brush, going back, sucking that up. And if you feel like it's not sort of sucking enough back, it means that the brush is quite wet and that there's a lot of water on the paper. So the sooner you can pull it up, the better. Now, lucky last thing, one more big splotch, and the one way of a more controlled splotch would be loading up the brush and just gently sort of pipetting it down. Well, I'll do a couple here, give it a little pattern like that. And then just to finish off, maybe a really bold color and get it really kind of splotching along. And some more up here as well. They really go nuts. And just, you know, play with color theory, play with what looks great. See what color combinations your eye just feasts upon. I always love the blues and browns. That's always my thing. Your thing might be totally different, and I really invite you to discover that. So I suppose the last little gold nugget of info regarding the Petri dish piece is once again that contrast between light and dark. You know, if the whole thing was as dense as this, it might be a little bit full on, but a little bit of a conversation between your light parts and the dark parts will translate really well later when we go to tell a story or capture a moment, and you really need to kind of make a crisp, clean, simple illustration. These little lessons early on are going to go just such a long, long way. So once again, the hardest thing to figure out sometimes is when to stop. I'll stop now so you can get started and make your little page of Petri dishes, which I'll tell you how to do just now. One lucky last tip I just remembered while all of this is still wet is to grab a napkin or something and just play with the idea of sort of soaking up some parts and really bringing a little bit of light into it. You can see in some areas it can really be, well, it can really do big favors for your paper as well. To do a little dab. It can of course make things look a little sloppy, so you have to be careful. But it's also a really good thing to have a little play with learning how to do that. Though I am a big advocate for just, you know, draining your brush with the finger or just like this, which should be sufficient. But if you do get a bit of a oh god moment, it's always good to soak up a big bunch of water. It is time to get inspired. So I thought I would put a short little segment at the tail end of each module to mimic, I suppose, what a classroom experience would offer in terms of discussing what other brilliant contemporary artists are doing, usually with the mediums that we're also working with, to have a look as to how they are using these brilliant mediums, what they're doing, and what we can learn from them and feel so inspired by. So the first artist that I thought would be great to chat about is a guy called Jacob Van Loon, born 1986. He lives in Colorado, and he works a lot with gouache and watercolor on paper. And this first piece here is called Untitled Landscape from 2018, and the reason that I love it so much is because the technique itself is very simple. You know, watercolor on a brush, as we have been doing. But the thoughtful, yet simultaneously relaxed and flowing lines really create so much movement on the paper just through simple repetition and a really loose wrist. Now, I must warn you, you're going to hear me use the words loose wrist in every module, because I honestly think it's the secret key to great success when it comes to an organic type of mark making that you simply cannot do with a rigid wrist and equally a rigid mind. So I think that for this reason, Jacob's work is really incredible and a great reference for us to look at. And I highly recommend his website. It's just jacobvanloon.com, where you can browse through different folders of brilliantly dynamic works, very much within the scope of the things that we're talking about. and what we're working on. And I think he's a really brilliant example of a professional artist that, you know, is, what's the word, demonstrates full-time commitment to his craft and isn't necessarily reinventing the wheel when it comes to using these mediums, but is able to use them in such an intoxicating and rich way that even other artists and just everybody else around him reflects on this work with great depth. And I could honestly look at these works forever. I guess the last thing I would say about this fantastic piece is something that I referred to earlier on in our module 1 here, where I talk about how I always use a brush that's larger than the marks I need to make, because I can go up on its little tippy point at any time, as Jacob will have likely done here, and then also just press a bit harder to get a wider line. So I think if you feel like exploring some mark making throughout the week between modules and the uploading of bonus content, a really great little side tangent for you to explore would be just using a select few colors like he did here, you know, some greens, blues, a nice dark red and that orange, having a refined palette and just making these really lovely consistent wavy lines next to each other and learning how to keep control of the brush, navigate the paint, and how to create these really dynamic flowing sequences without having to do much more than play with different lines. Now, in this next piece called Station X 2014, which is a mixed media work, which is watercolor, acrylic, and graphite on paper, I've chosen this work to briefly touch on because the white parts that have been put in, which is the part that I think is the acrylic, I would almost hazard that it was done, some of the work was done by finger painting it onto the paper or being really quite rough and gestural when it comes to applying it with a brush. And you can see that it's quite thinly applied because some sections appear quite translucent, whereas if he was just really splotching it on, you'd see kind of oilier, rounder marks. So often just keeping the brush really dry and feeling really free and gestural to interrupt what is otherwise a really highly curated and very, very specific, and here as we can see, three-dimensional structure and sequence can lead to such fantastic results. And I can tell you now, if he had completed the piece without the white acrylic and the other small gestural staccato marks flowing through the piece, if it were just the lovely geometric lines and kind of an architectural sketch, my eye really wouldn't be terribly riveted. It's the fact that he really fearlessly took it to the next level and took the chance to really mess it up that really excites me and keeps my eye grazing over this piece constantly, and just seeing these lovely dry brush marks down on the lower third, just on this yellow door here, seeing those lovely orange, sort of really dry brush marks alongside the gestural white interrupting this otherwise fabulously curated sequence is just truly the mark of genius for me. In addition to these little confetti marks, which were just so thoughtful and just really take the eye on a tour of this dense composition. So much to think about, so much to enjoy. And once again, the courage to really kind of attack it with flow, I think is what makes this piece so fabulous. And the lucky last Jacob Van Loon piece for today is this one entitled 2016 Landscape. And for me, this work is pure genius. Sometimes you can't necessarily explain why something just blows your mind, and maybe it's because I've been playing with and working with watercolor and gouache professionally for more than 10 years, and yet I am still absolutely riveted by a piece like this. There is just so much dynamism in here and such courage with the different strokes and the different thickness of the marks. I can't necessarily say how many sizes of different brushes that he used in this work, because you can see by the light blue swirling thin lines curving on the right hand side how those marks are so much thinner than the fantastic gestural swift marks done once again with a very loose wrist up in the top third. Really big contrast in both direction and intuition from the artist, and just so fantastic in the way that it uses the black to not blot out or darken the sequence, but somehow elevate it to the next level, where I'm just sitting here going, wow, like everything seems so thoughtless and natural yet thoughtful and wonderfully guided at the same time. And I can tell you now with great confidence and love that this kind of mark making can only come from pushing paint, testing paint, flicking, splashing, marking for years, and just a fearless exploration of this beautiful forgiving medium, which any of us really can attain through just a devoted and loving practice. And just on a more personal note of interest, I'm just looking at the way that the dense blackness was raised to be completed with a really dry finish, which I'm looking especially over in the right hand corner just above the little blue swirly bits where the black escapes into the white and sort of driving straight up with this really dry brush. I find that part really exciting because it makes me wonder if he used anything that is an unorthodox method to a paintbrush. For example, I've done work where I've just twisted and tied together different little dry branches or leaves and things and just used that as a paintbrush, which can also lead to fantastic effects and is something that we're going to chat about later on in the course. But what I love about this piece is that it makes me ask so many questions, and it really makes me wish I could glimpse into the artist's studio and see exactly how Jacob had done this work. And probably on my final note, it may pay to take special interest in looking at the very bottom of this piece and how the other three sides are taken all the way to the edge of the paper, but the bottom is left a little bit incomplete. And I think that that's a really special and thoughtful touch. And please never think that anything is unintentional by the artist because it would have taken a couple of seconds to tidy that bottom line. But instead, the artist here has chosen to tease the eye, to give it a bit of a contrast and to continue surprising it. So I just want you to take all of this and either throw it out the window or try and absorb it into your head in terms of how to be free but thoughtful at the same time, which is the tightrope that probably all artists working in this vein employ all the time. So hopefully I have excited your eye sufficiently for today. And now what we're going to do is have a little flip through one of my favorite journals, where I will also narrate you through the flipping and just talk a little bit more about the mark making that connects right back to Jacob, right back to everything that we've just been through with our petri dish experiments and our other watercolor play, because ultimately the guide to fearless making is really just having a crack. And as soon as you have a first crack, you realize that it's not so scary, and then the second crack is less scary, the third one increasingly fun, and by the end of it, you're just having a brilliant, careless play and probably coming up, in fact, no doubt, coming up with much more refreshing, exciting compositions and marks than you thought were ever possible. So we're going to have a little flip through the journal now. I'll chat to you a bit more about mark making, and I can't wait to check in with you when I upload the bonus content to fill out the work for this week, and to see what you'll come up with. So let's have a look at a journal now. Now let's have a look at this lovely travel moleskin from a 2016 trip that I took to Singapore, Hungary, Austria and Japan. Already we can see just in these early pages of tropical humidity how much simple, fast gestural lines can convey an experience so effectively. And just there you saw the transition from a tropical place to Eastern Europe and how already the colour scheme changed and the technique of drawing changed. And whilst it was all really simple and straightforward all the way, in both cases, even just the colours and the way you use your brush can communicate so much about a particular experience or a story you want to convey, whether that's meals and hanging paprika, as we just saw there, or a little devotional Virgin Mary with the baby Jesus. These are all really quick documentations, generally with the really loose wrist ink drawing first, and then I would probably draw up, say, 3 or 4 double pages, and then later in a different moment, maybe the evening of that day, I will then go through and paint it up. Now on the left hand side here in particular, and here again you can see the splashes and the layers of dry paint, which I usually use to literally dry off my brush as I'm working on the other side, the hero page. So remember, the right hand side is typically my hero page, and then the left hand side is usually the supporting actress. So in this case with the face, that is the main focus, and on the left hand side I was probably just using the scrap paint that hides in the brush between uses because I don't want to waste it. Some pages can just be quick and easy, a quick idea. Others like this maybe hold a bit more meaning, but you can see the looseness of that wrist this whole time, and these delicious colors and the ways in which they interact shouldn't be controlled by my anxious mind or where it thinks things should go. I really believe in just trusting the process, trusting the mark, and if I know that if I'm scared to make a mark, that's the mark I've got to make. Here I say I have eaten enough to last a lifetime, which is the calling card of a good holiday, and I know that we have all been there. Now these are just really quick little sketches that I might do on a park bench, just drawing a tree, a little stump, a cat, as I maybe stop to eat a quick muesli bar or whatever, and then on I walk again. It's really funny looking back and seeing all the different colors that I used, and I can feel that it was summertime. I don't know if you can feel it as directly as I can, or maybe it's knowing myself, but I can just really feel from the crispness of these colors and the ways that they're interacting that it was luscious, it was summer, it was hot, it was colorful, and I can really feel that really clearly from the work and the summery colors that I was choosing to represent it with. And this right here, this page on the right hand side with the many consecutive small lines, this is exactly the types of exercises that we'll be doing more of, and I fully encourage you to do more of in your own time, just to practice how the colors interact, how my brush holds the paint, how my brush holds the water, how everything happens. The more you can practice on the pages of your moleskin, even in between little assignments from me, I would be overjoyed to see double pages of just these repetitive marks, because it'll be muscle memory for your wrist, it'll be lovely candy for your eye, and a wonderful way of tracking your progress and handling, and for a lack of a better word, control, although I don't really love that word, that idea of learning how to master this medium to be able to convey the story that you want to tell with it. So without further ado, I'll now summarize what I am hoping to see from you this week. And of course, you put in or you get out what you put in. So the more you feel like doing, the more I encourage you to do, and the more support you'll have from me. If you just want to sit back and chill, or have a massive week ahead and just want to kind of do the minimum and just listen and be present in the workshop group, that's equally fine by me. I'm here to serve you, to help you, and to inspire you. So as always, now that we're starting the course, don't forget and don't be afraid to put messages in the group, message me directly, and I'll be right there to assist you with any struggles you might have. Right behind you, so, ganbatte!